Hello students, in this module I'll be talking about the second part of the development of the male gametophyte, which will happen after pollination on the stigma. So look, listen and learn. So let us see what happens after pollination on the stigma. So let us do a little bit of pollination here. So you see here, whoa, a pollen just landed on the stigma, right? And this is called as pollination. Now, what kind of pollen was this? I told you in the previous module that most probably this pollen will be a two-celled pollen, which is now going to land on the stigma. Now, what will happen after it lands on the stigma? It is going to come in contact with sugary stigmatic secretions and start to absorb it. Right? So that's the stigma right here, and from the stigma it is going to absorb certain sugary secretions, right? Now as a result of this, what will happen that in the pollen grain the volume of the cytoplasm will increase. Now, of course, you know that when the volume increases, the pressure will rise, right? So the next step, what will happen is that it creates a pressure which acts on the intine. Remember, intine was the inner wall, right? Labeled right up there. So on the intine, when the pressure is created, the intine will now come out through the germ pore in the form of this tube-like structure, which is called as the pollen tube. Is that okay? So that's the pollen tube. Now in the pollen tube, you've just seen that the cytoplasm of the pollen has entered. It will be followed by the tube nucleus, right? And if you move further, what you will see is that this pollen tube will keep elongating. And in the pollen tube, you will see tube nucleus, cytoplasm, as well as generative cell. They will all want to get inside the pollen tube. Let us see how. Something like this, right? The pollen tube elongated, right? The tube nucleus went inside. The generative cell is also trying to follow, right? Now, why is this pollen tube enlarging? You should know that the pollen tube is basically growing down towards the ovule through the style due to chemotaxis. Now, what is chemotaxis? Now, down there in the ovary, the ovules are releasing certain chemical substances which are attracting the pollen tube towards them, and that is called as chemotaxis, right? Now, that is the pollen tube, right, which is moving through the style. And in the pollen tube, what you can see is the tube nucleus, which has already gone down. You can also see a little bit of cytoplasm that has entered of the pollen grain. And what you see up there, still at the neck of the pollen tube, is nothing but the generative cell. Now remember, while in the pollen tube, this generative cell will undergo mitosis. And when it undergoes mitosis, it produces two haploid but non-motile male gametes. Let us make them. There you go. What you just made here are nothing but two male gametes, which are non-motile, and just because of gravity, they will go down into the pollen tube and they will follow the tube nucleus. Now what you see is the finally developed mature male gametophyte. And what does contain? It basically contains the pollen tube. In the pollen tube, there will be two male gametes, there will be a cytoplasm, and there will also be this degenerating tube nucleus, which is sterile and not used at all in the process of fertilization. Is that okay? So this entire structure is called as a mature male gametophyte. Is that okay? So in this module, I have talked about the second stage of the development of the male gametophyte, where I've discussed what happens after pollination in the pollen on the stigma. Is that okay? And how it changes from a two-cell pollen to a three-cell pollen. In the next module, I'll be talking about the structure of anatropous ovule. Till then, thank you and take care.